Hey guys, welcome back to the channel McNallie Money, the official home of power mining analysis. A huge video for you today, a head-to-head comparison between CleanSpark and Riot's July production results, two of the heavy hitters in the Tier 1 or Big 4 category. In addition to that, some exciting news out from Bitfarms, all in today's show. Before we get into it, take a second, hit the like button guys, big help to myself and the channel. If you're not already subscribed, McNallie Money, feel free to join and let us know in the comment section below if you're currently holding any of these three stocks and how you're feeling about the Bitcoin mining space in general. With that being said, let's get into today's episode. All right, guys, away we go. A big podcast in store for you today. We've got two top miners reporting their July production results. Going to be doing a head-to-head comparison between CleanSpark and Riot Platforms in today's presentation, in addition to some exciting news out from Bitfarms and their HPC development or pursuit strategy. So before we get into that, Bitcoin price itself continuing to struggle, now back in the 113 neighborhood here. Surprising to see, despite all the positive developments we've covered on the channel, these pullbacks in light of all the buying pressure we're seeing from corporations, from governments, from whales, and from the general public.
Yeah, absolutely. A bit of pullback today because we've had Donald Trump actually had a phoning call with CNBC earlier today and just went off-piste, naming and shaming everything that was going on in the world. So Canada got mentioned, India got mentioned, China got mentioned, all good people, but all bad people at the same time. Tariffs were really important. And so I think this has knocked a little bit of confidence in the markets. It's not quite sure yet, who really benefits when the tariffs are in place there. It actually probably goes back to the to the American people end up paying more effectively for products because they're so used to having these products. If you think about go around your house now in North America and look at every product you've got there and where that product came from, the chances are most of it came from the Far East. China. China's very much integrated, not just in North America, but all around the world. They are a mass producer of electronics and technical equipment there. So I guarantee, as much as people like to say I like buying British or buying American vis-a-vis where you live, the chances are you've probably got some of those products there. And if the president of the US is going to put big tariffs on those products coming through, that's going to affect a lot of people. I think that the rhetoric sounds okay. I mean, it's like, we want to make sure we're not getting penalized as much as our products are going abroad. But time will tell. And I think the issue today was more around the tariffs affecting the Bitcoin price. It dropped from about 115 all the way down to 112,000. But again, this might be a one-day push, and then we start seeing the recovery like we've seen the last few weeks, where we've had these drops, and the same day or the day after it's managed to find its way back to that position and hold there. It's still in that nice trading position there, 113, 117,000. So let's see how this works out over the next few days.
Yeah, an interesting development. And like you say, Anthony, despite how hard I try, I can't find a Canadian-made PlayStation or MacBook computer. So I guess we're stuck for now with the tariffs. In terms of the Bitcoin miners, they're actually holding up relatively well considering the price of Bitcoin. We grabbed a snapshot here. You do see a few green shoots, so to speak. An interesting comment I saw from last week as well. Friday was obviously a bloodbath in the markets, but you need to remember that's a Friday at month end. So a lot of option expiration and option activity. We saw a nice little recovery yesterday in the market in terms of Bitcoin miners. Bitcoin price, again, not really doing a ton. And today the miners are managing to stay afloat relatively well.
Yeah, there's sort of like a mixed bag today. We've got 5 or 6 in the green and then probably a similar amount, maybe slightly more in the red, but that's to be expected when the Bitcoin price drops. Likes of Core Scientific is holding up okay, but remember Core Scientific not really leveraged against Bitcoin as much in the future as it was previously because it's got this big HPC agreement with CoreWeave. CleanSpark's having a reasonably good day. That's in positive territory, as is Wulf and Soluna Holdings. But again, some of the stocks are playing catch up from last week. If you look at last week's positions, we're still seeing a lot of double digits down from a number of companies. Cipher and Riot especially were down more than double digits in the last 7 days, and so trying to play that recovery game there. But yeah, this is the way Bitcoin prices. This is the way the mining stocks, feature in terms of how they're positioned against Bitcoin price. There, the correlation between the two, and we're just having one of those days where, we've got that correlation impacting the price of miners because Bitcoin's down.
Yeah, you're exactly right there, Anthony. Now, I have to admit, listening to some of these Mag 7 or hyperscaler earnings calls this week has got me quite excited about the Bitcoin mining space. So we've seen some of the biggest corporations in the world report, including Meta, Nvidia. Some of these heavy hitters we talk about are these hyperscalers we're hopeful of the miners getting contracts with. The recurring theme on each and every one of these earnings calls was AI is here to stay. AI is much bigger than we initially thought, and we are investing a lot of money into AI. So listening to this has made me feel very comfortable with my Bitcoin miner investments and really that these companies are in the right spot at the right time. Now, as an extension of that, Bitfarms came out with some news today talking about a partnership with T5 data centers or tier 5 data centers, a play on the data center construction industry. But they specifically talk about the Meta earnings call and the ability of this partnership to progress their Panther Creek data center plans and potentially get this campus ready for a hyperscaler. So it's interesting to see these companies that we talk about day in and day out now being mentioned and interacting with some of the largest companies in the world on this HPC AI integration roadmap.
Yeah, and Ben told us when we interviewed him last podcast there that he was expecting more exciting news coming forward this year, and this is a big piece of news now. This partnership with T5 data centers, and they've got customers including 7 major hyperscalers in the US. So they've got a lot of industry expertise. They're a proven leader in data center construction, development, and operations. And what this will do for Bitfarms is this is the pre-construction design getting into place now, and that will unlock further funding. We talked about Macquarie investing this 300 million, and we're releasing it in stages as certain deadlines were met. And 50 million has already been released to start the process, and there'll be more funding now, I would imagine, as soon as these designs ready for construction are completed, to move ahead there. But we've talked about how AI is changing the landscape in the US there, and even the White House has committed to 90 billion of AI investments, in Pennsylvania. So, and Bitfarms being there, we're not just one site; they've got 4 sites. So that stands to put them in a really good position. And yeah, we've got Ben coming on the podcast, I think, next week, and hopefully he can give us some further insight into how this partnership is going to work.
Yeah, hopefully you can. And we talk a lot about the Texas grid and ERCOT power supply. This PJM market in the Pennsylvania area is a very highly coveted area in the United States for data center construction, very close to a lot of urban cities. We've talked about the importance of fiber, redundancy, location to urban civilization, and this really checks a lot of those boxes. You can see many of the sites that Bitfarms now possesses based on that acquisition of Stronghold now meet the criteria for HPC. So this is an exciting one. We've talked about the selling pressure as Riot exits their position in Bitfarms, but definitely one I would not overlook in the immediate future here. Now, the next part of today's discussion, a head-to-head battle, CleanSpark versus Riot. They just came out with their July production results. We did a video last week talking about the big 4, so to speak, IREN, CleanSpark, Mara, and Riot. 2 of them now reported on the same day. So this is an interesting one. We'll kick it off maybe with CleanSpark first, and then we can move into Riot.
Yeah, it was a good month for CleanSpark in terms of production there. So the one concern for the month was the average operational hash rate, which a lot of these miners now disclose. We know from a total energized hash rate they have 50 exahash. That was achieved back in June, well in advance of their deadline at the end of the month. But average operational hash rate for July was only 41.9. That's effectively just under 84% of hash rate being able to be utilized in the month. Now, a lot of that was down to the weather. Weather conditions play, a challenge for miners in the summer. In a lot of these states in America, where the temperatures can get into the 90s and even higher, and the demand for electricity increases as well. So when the demand increases, these miners play good citizens and start turning it down to allow that domestic demand to be met. And equally, we sometimes see if we have seriously cold winters, the effect can happen again with people requiring additional heat for their homes. They'll put heating on for longer periods, not used in the summer, obviously, but in the winter be used in the winter periods. And again, miners will start curtailing. And what we've seen now in the last few months, in 2025 actually is starting to look a little bit more like 2023 in terms of that curtailment size there. It's not just happening to CleanSpark, it's happening to a number of miners, and we'll cover rights in a second. But just under 84%. Operational power increased to over 1 gigawatt now, so 1,003 megawatts. That's an increase of 2%. And we know they're going to continue to increase power as they get to their next target of 60 megawatts. Another good positive input from CleanSpark was the efficiency of their mining fleet. That's coming down again, 16.07 down from 16.15. Only IREN has a more efficient fleet than CleanSpark. And in terms of their strategy for HODL, in terms of their strategy for HODL, they're continuing to sell a good proportion of their production to meet operational and capital requirements. Remember, CleanSpark has said we're not going to use the ATM whilst the share price is lower than $20. And today, last time I saw it was, just over $10. So they've got quite a bit of a rise before they start implementing that strategy. So they're utilizing some of the Bitcoin they've mined. They're not selling all of it. They added to their HODL about close to 100 Bitcoin, and their HODL now sits at 12,703 Bitcoin, which valued as at the end of July is a valuation of 1.4, nearly $1.5 billion. And finally, we always like to include some of these miners where they've got a HODL. What's the value of their HODL as a percentage of their market capitalization? And at pre-market today, when this table was produced, it was 49%, increase from 40% last month there. That's part and parcel due to the increase in the value of Bitcoin over that period as well. So, overall, a very good update there. The only obviously downside is the curtailment there. It's a significant amount of curtailment, but miners know that, when that energy is required, they're the first ones to shut down, and they can do it very, very quickly and equally get the machines back up and running as and when power's available.
Yeah, a difficult month for CleanSpark. The share price reflecting that, now down at the $10.65 range. So I can remember last year we were above $20 on this ticker, Anthony. Definitely some headwinds here. Now, CleanSpark is expected to report earnings this week on the 7th. You've put together an estimation here. This was part of that Big Four coverage. We've discussed this on prior videos, but it'll be interesting to see how closely the numbers that CleanSpark reports this week line up here, and whether or not investors are happy, and the response obviously with the share price at that point. So with that being said, we'll move into Riot now. This is interesting. Again, curtailment, a big factor in the month of July. However, Riot, as we heard from Jason Less in yesterday's Q2 interview, has a unique competitive advantage in terms of their power strategy. I'll let you get into that next.
Absolutely. So unlike CleanSpark, who operate, 33 different sites, Riot just have a couple of sites, but one of those sites, the Rockdale facility, that has a significant PPA agreement in place. 345 megawatts is part of the PPA contract. And so effectively that has a fixed price energy there. If the price of energy increases, it enables Riot to make the decision as to either mine at the price of the agreement or switch off and sell the power back to the grid. And in the month of July, they utilised that really well. And a total of 13.9 million was received in total power credit. Some of that down to the 4CP program, where they're required to switch off at both sites at regular times during the day to meet the demand, and then part of that, the larger amount of that 13.9 million is coming from the fact that they curtailed and sold back to the grid when it became favourable to do that. And if you actually look at that 13.9 million and say, well, what would that be in Bitcoin if they had carried on mining? That's 120 equivalent Bitcoin for that value there. Now, in terms of mining for the month, they mined 484 Bitcoin. That was a great month, considering they didn't increase anything significantly installed hash rate. It went up by zero point 0.1 of an exahash, so very much marginal increase there. In terms of operational hash rate, that went up by 1%. But Bitcoin mined for the month, it proves they had a really good month in July. They managed to increase the production by 34, which is an 8% increase. Now, bear in mind, CleanSpark, because of that curtailment, weren't able to manage the same amount as they did in June. And if you look at the difficulty for those 2 months, their difficulty actually was flat in July. So therefore, that can't be a factor. And we've got an extra day's mining. So in theory, most of the miners should be without curtailment, mining slightly more than their numbers there. And Riot obviously had a good month there, 8% up in terms of additional Bitcoin mined. Now, the other standout point from them is really the cost of power. They've been quoting around about 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour as their blended rate. Well, during the month of July, that dropped significantly down to 2.8 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, we know the PPA contract is probably closer to 3.8 cents. That tells me that they were able at their Corsicana facility to achieve significantly low power costs for the majority of the month there to get that blended price down from 3.8 to 2.8 there. And, if those of you that haven't watched the podcast last night, I honestly, take a listen to what Jason says about power costs and where, on some occasions, they're effectively negative power costs. He explains it really well. So if you haven't watched the podcast, have a listen to it. We went through it last night. It's out there for you to watch now. Well worth listening to. And so that now, talking about the power costs last night, bringing out this operational update today, you can see an 18% reduction in power. Now, in terms of Bitcoin mined per day, 15.6, we know that's higher than what they did in June. It was only 15 there. And the Bitcoin mined per exahash also increased by 6%. So 16 Bitcoin per exahash, exactly the same as what CleanSpark did there. So Riot and CleanSpark, and when we get IREN's numbers out, I'm sure they're all going to be very much the same, along with Hive Digital. They're the 4 ones that are starting to move away from the rest of the pack this month here. So good to see the 2 of the top 4 there already bringing their results out and already looking really well. In terms of sales, Riot also, having built that big hodl, well over 19,000, in these recent months have started to utilise some of the production to pay for operational and for some of the capital costs as they start to deliver now their HPC strategy at the Corsicana site. And we're with Jason also talking a lot about that on last night's podcast. The hodl's increased effectively by 14 to 19,287 Bitcoin. That has a current value at the end of July of 2.2 billion, and that represents 53% of the market capitalization as it was pre-market open today.
Yeah, you're right about that. And one interesting observation, I thought about this last night. You brought up, I think it was slide 7 in the presentation, Anthony, out of their investor deck. You can clearly see a large amount of groundworks going on in the bottom left here, some large heavy equipment diggers excavators on site. Now, when I start to think through this in my mind, Jason has talked about the ability to move miners out of Rockdale if needed. We understand that obviously the recent developments with rhodium have opened up some additional megawatts there. And as you alluded to, that PPA in place also gives some, I guess, consistency or stability in terms of power supply and power pricing for a potential HPC opportunity. So that's going to be an interesting one to watch. Now, the other component we talked about with Jason is the engineering division, ESS Metron. They acquired this a number of years back. Not only have they grown the business in terms of top line revenue, but they've also realized now $18.5 million of internal CapEx savings. So we did a little digging on the website. It looks like Riot is hiring across the board a number of positions. We couldn't find anything specific for HPC, but Jason did allude to the fact they're starting at the top there. They're bringing in a new team. So a couple other elements to keep an eye on here: the engineering, the staffing, the human capital, and whatever that construction activity is at Rockdale.
Yeah, great to see, a number of advertisements there. And as they progress the HPC strategy, we'll start to see more and more recruitment posts for key positions in there. Now, remember, back in June, they hired Jonathan Gibbs as the Chief Data Center Officer to lead this data center platform. And he's obviously a key signing there with an immense amount of previous experience in this space there and recognized, in the industry. And so he will obviously be part of the strategic level team there to drive this. But as you start getting further and further through the phases, they'll start to recruit more and more people as we start seeing these data centers being produced in readiness for, contracts to start with a potential client.
Yeah, most definitely. So that's one we're keeping a close eye on. Another chart we're watching closely here, the HODL 15 Top 100. This continues to evolve. We were joking over the weekend. I think power mining analysis between you and I would have made the cut a few months ago, but that's not the case anymore. Whether you're talking about the top 10, just absolutely gobbling up Bitcoin, or even the last place position, the benchmark continues to get higher and higher.
Yeah, I mean, go back 6 or 7 months ago, the list was only 70 companies, and to get on that list, you had to have three. The list today is 100 companies, and to make the list, you've got to have a minimum of 50 Bitcoin. And at today's price, that's well over, $6 million in terms of Bitcoin value of that size of hole there. And if you look at the table, then look at the green arrows. Now he updates this on a regular basis, so you can see from the last update, which probably maybe a week ago at the most, maybe even less than that, you can see potentially maybe 20% of the companies on there have actually increased their hodl just in that last period there. So this is a constant race to get to these targets. And some of those at the top have got some enormous targets. We've talked about strategy. They want, probably a minimum of 5%. I think they've got a target of 10%. They're already at 3%. So they've got another couple of percent to get to that initial target. And maybe Michael Saylor thinks we got halfway. We'll continue there. But a number of other companies on there also looking to get to some significant top. Metaplanet, I think they're looking for 210,000 Bitcoins. That would give them effectively 1% of all the Bitcoin. And so, and that goes along then for a lot of other companies on there. Bitcoin Standard Treasury, 21. These are new, recently, companies that have moved onto this list here. The Trump Media and Tech, 15,000 Bitcoin there. So, some high numbers here, but 50 gets you onto the table at the moment as it is there. And I reckon that's going to increase significantly over this next few months as more and more new companies come in with fresh capital to buy Bitcoin and join this group.
Hey, if I was a big company like that, I'd probably rather spend 5 or 6 million to get on this list than a Super Bowl commercial. I think even just the notoriety, the visibility in the Bitcoin community, it's good advertising for 5 million bucks. So with that being said, we wanted to jump over to the Luxor hash rate index. This is one we follow closely, really the fundamentals of the Bitcoin mining industry. A couple key highlights here. You can see adjustment or difficulty adjustment, I should say, August 8th. So this week, a slight increase, which again, compared to what we've seen in prior adjustments is really a breath of fresh air within the 1-2% range. The other thing we're monitoring closely is the global hash rate. Now, this is a 7-day moving average, but you can see even that blended average now getting in excess of 944 exahash. So the machines continue to be plugged in, hash rate continues to come online, the difficulty continues to increase, and hash price, unfortunately, is now down in the $56 range.
Yeah, and as we said before, I still feel that the global hash rate is starting to flatten a little bit. Yes, it's 944 now, but believe you me, we've had many, many days in the last 2 or 3 months where it's gone over 1,000. Not for any major length of time there, but it's hit that 1,000 with quite regularity, and it hasn't really got to that level on a 7-day average at the moment. This is probably as high as it's been. So I still think in these months now, we've talked about curtailment. We've talked about difficulty. We've talked about impact to miners globally, and I just don't think we're seeing that same that same resurgence in sort of global hash rate that we did for maybe the last 2 or 3 years, as we saw that massive growth happen really, really quickly. But it is still going higher, and that still is a problem for Bitcoin miners. And you're quite right there. The hash price dropping to 56. Again, that's eroding some of those potential margins that they were enjoying when the Bitcoin hash price was over $60, which was fairly recently. Literally most of the July it was in the 60 range there, but coming down to now 56. Still a long way from where it was at its lowest. It was under $40 a hash rate last year, and that would have been really challenging there. But still, I would imagine a lot of these miners should be able to make a margin at the current price of Bitcoin and the current hash price that we're seeing on that table there.
Yeah, I certainly think so, but we'll obviously welcome any increases as they come. Now, a few other housekeeping items. We've been receiving a lot of interest on the news portion of our website. So our team has put together basically a highlights or top news story section here. It's meant to be a condensed version of our videos. So if you don't have a time for maybe a 20-25 minute video, you can go in, look at the highlights from the week or the month here. Also wanted to take a look at the special guest component of the website as well. You'll see our most recent interview, Eric Jackson. That was extremely well received by the audience. Apparently, the Wall Street perspective on the miners is very welcome around here. So we reached out and invited Kevin Deedy on the program tomorrow. He's from H.C. Wainwright, one of the senior tech analysts. You can see his profile here. Looking very forward to that one. You've had the pleasure of being on some panels with Kevin. And as you say, Anthony, known for, I guess, his transparency, not holding back.
Yeah, Kevin's an experienced senior analyst, with one of the largest investment banks in Wall Street there, H.C. Wainwright, over 20 years of experience. So I'm looking forward to that conversation tomorrow. Kevin doesn't really hold back in these scenarios. We were both on the panel with him back in Mining Disrupt in March in Fort Lauderdale, along with Matt Siegel from Van Eyck. And that was a really, really good panel to be part of. And I remember some of the responses from Kevin, some of the questions that were asked. And, he doesn't hold back. He gives it everything, and he'll explain, how he feels about the industry, where he sees it going. So that'd be a really, really good one to tune into. We've started to see a few of the analysts go on to, some of the YouTube podcasts around there. So this is great for us to get Kevin on here. I'm sure he won't be the last one to come on the channel either.
Yeah, I'm sure he won't. And yes, we will be talking about executive or stock-based comp on the call, getting the Wall Street perspective. You guys can rest assured. The other one we have coming up this afternoon, actually, fun one, HPC Buzz Special. So this is the subsidiary of Hive Digital. We've talked extensively about their exahash growth throughout 2025. They're also growing their HPC AI division or subsidiary, which of course is Buzz HPC. Craig Tavares is going to be on the program today, giving us a deep dive into this company's strategy and growth profile. So looking forward to those, you guys. We also have Cipher coming up later this week on Friday. And as you mentioned, Bitfarms next week. So if you have any questions, get them in the comment section below. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you back here shortly.